We're about to try to demonstrate that at the Einstein Forum, people do sometimes come to order. We're about to try to demonstrate that at the Einstein Forum, it is possible to hold reasonable and passionate discussions among people of goodwill who may deeply disagree with each other. It's a tough call. We decided to hold this session not at the beginning, on the hope and assumption that if people had spent 2 days together, they might... No, it's a good guess, you know. They're not positions, they're human beings who are, all of them, I should say, are people of good faith and integrity and honesty, and that it would be easier if we didn't do this for the very last session, but the next to last. I should say that this entire topic is Kostek's fault. I mentioned in my introduction how we usually plan the board conference. That is, at the board meeting, the boards discuss various ideas, throw them around of what we'd like to discuss next year. This year we came up with 3, so those of you on the board are going to get some letters from me. We have some decisions to make. We came up with 3 good ideas. Last year we came up with the idea of judgment, and then so roundabout, I don't know, some months later, I wrote to all the board members asking if they had a particular topic on judgment that they would like to speak about, and Kostek writes, judging Israel. And I wrote back, oi, Kostek. And he said, well, you know, if you don't want me to, okay, but it is the most important question of judgment. Said, all right, well, we'll take it on. We were very much hoping to have, along with Nahed Samour, Avrum Burg, in the flesh. He's even better in the flesh than he is on screen. But thank you for being with us on screen, Avrum. And I want to say a word which I found really interesting. This has to do with a process of our making our weird posters, okay? They're quite distinctive. When I first came on to the Einstein Forum, I sort of ran a contest among different graphic artists. And everybody else came up with designs that looked like train tables. And this one woman, Frau Schmidt, enjoyed the idea of playing with different pictures. And so she has been doing this with and for us for 25 years. The process of coming up with a poster is we tell Frau Schmidt a couple of weeks before, we want pictures that have to do with these 3 main themes that we're talking about in the program. She comes up with pictures, the whole team stands around and says, not that, and yes that, and so on and so on. This is the first time that Frau Schmidt intervened in the content, and we've never had a conversation except about pictures, and it's Frau Schmidt and Frau Neumann, and has been for 25 years. And she said, well, judgment, how about this? Now, I had just been visiting Albie Sachs and listening to him talk about the process of constituting the first constitutional court in Free South Africa, and how they didn't want wigs, and they didn't want, a lot of the trappings of hierarchy. So I took a quick glance in that, and I said, I'm not sure we meant judgment, in that sense. And she said, Frau Neumann, have you looked closely at the picture? And I said, Frau Schmidt, you're way more subversive than I thought you were. I take it now that it's up there, everybody recognizes what the picture is that I didn't see when it was a small. Does anybody not recognize it? Well, Nahed is going to talk about it now. So this was a truly interesting cooperative effort. Nahed, Kostik, and Avrum are going to each speak for no more than 15 minutes. It can be less. There will be a discussion afterwards between them, so each of them will have a chance to answer each other's claims and arguments, and then we'll throw it open to all of you. Welcome to the Einstein Forum.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for this kind invitation. Thank you to Susan and everyone else involved in making this possible here. So I would like to start with two foundational observations. One, violations of international law by states are the norm and not the exception. And requesting a court, therefore, to assess and address such violations are, two, also a standard and expected practice within the international legal order, and not the exception. Thus, invoking international legal procedure in relation to the state of Israel should not be viewed as an anomaly, but as a manifestation of the ordinary functioning of international legal norms and institutions. So the focus of my remarks today will be the International Court of Justice, ICJ, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, and it's mandated to the ICJ to first settle in accordance with international legal disputes submitted to it by the states, and second, to give advisory opinions on legal questions referred to by the authorized UN organs and agencies of its system. So in recent months and years, the ICJ has engaged in a series of significant proceedings concerning the conduct of the State of Israel. And I'm going to mention the proceedings to you because I'm very much insisting on working with this material. So all the terms I will be using come from this material, and I'm insisting on using these concepts as legal terminology, not as ideological terms, not as Kampfbegriffe, as some people would want to use them. So law. Now, one of these proceedings is the International Court's Justice Provisional Measures Order in the application of the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel, in January, March, and May 2024, every time with respect to the plausibility of genocide taking place against the Palestinian people. The three sets of provisional measures were necessitated because Israel refused to implement the first ones, as the ICJ explicitly states. This makes Israel the first country against which three sets of orders against genocide had to be made. In the March 2024 order, the ICJ made an explicit connection between starvation and genocide, and in the May 2024 order, the ICJ made an explicit connection between forced displacement and genocide. There's another related case, the Nicaragua versus Germany case, for complicity in genocide. The third one is the ICJ advisory opinion from July 19, 2024 on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, in which the court assessed violations of international law, namely that the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land has been illegal from the beginning in 1967, that Israel violates the prohibition of annexation, i.e. acquisition of territory by force, that Israel violates Article 3 of the UN Anti-Racism Convention, third, namely segregation and apartheid, and that it violates the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people. The court stated, quote, that Israel is under an obligation to bring the unlawful occupation to an end as rapidly as possible, cease immediately all new settlement activities and evacuate settlers from the occupied Palestinian territory, and make reparations for damages caused to all natural or legal persons concerned in the occupied Palestinian territory, and allow all displaced Palestinians to return to their lands and property. The public hearings of this advisory opinion were held in February 2024 before the International Court, with an unprecedented number of 49 states in 3 international organizations presenting oral statements. So from that number, you can get an idea of how many states really wanted to be heard before the International Court of Justice on exactly these legal questions and on Israel and Palestine. Now, there's another pending ICJ advisory opinion, and the opinion is due now in July 2025, before all these judges go and break into their summer vacations, on the questions of the obligations of Israel in relation to the presence and activities of the UN, other international organizations, and third states in relation to the occupied Palestinian territory, i.e. regarding Israel's blocking of humanitarian aid through UN agencies, blocking of food and medication, including baby formula, into Gaza, leading to the starvation of Palestinians. And here the hearings included 39 states, the UN, and 3 international organizations. And there's the case from 2004 where the ICJ declared the Israeli wall built on confiscated and annexed Palestinian land to be illegal. So why does judging Israel garner so much legal attention? It is because these cases do not center plainly on violations of international law, as I just explained. That's the norm. States violate international law all the time. But instead, it's because they address the core of international law, jus cogens. So the heightened legal attention afforded to the conduct of the State of Israel stems from the very nature of the legal norms being violated. The cases before the International Court of Justice concerning Israel implicate not only general principles of international law, which would already be bad enough, but engage in jus cogens norms. What is meant by jus cogens? They're called the peremptory norms of international law. They're recognized by the international community as norms from which no derogation is possible. These norms are so fundamental that they bind all states. And this is the self-explanation of the nation states when they come together to determine what is jus cogens. So even without contractual or treaty obligations, without exceptions or objections, they constitute customary law. This, the DNA of international law, if you want. This binding nature explains why states such as South Africa may or did bring proceedings before the ICJ under the Genocide Convention without being a direct party to the armed conflict, because they consider themselves bound by the norms through customary law, and in this case also because they ratified the UN Convention, and consider themselves of failing their own obligations if they do not address these questions to the International Court of Justice. So these norms include the prohibition of genocide, crimes against humanity, racial discrimination and apartheid, as well as the right of peoples to self-determination and the fundamental rules of international humanitarian law, such as the prohibition on targeting civilians. Now, peremptory norms give rise to obligations owed to the entire international community. So the ICJ keeps on repeating that these are norms or these are obligations that are owed by the entire international community. Neither consent nor self-defense or countermeasures in respect of an internationally wrongful act can be invoked to disrespect peremptory norms. And it is within this legal framework that the actions and legislative frameworks adopted by Israel in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem must be evaluated. Now, the ICJ decisions matter because, concretely speaking, the policies and practices, and this is what the International Court of Justice found in its advisory opinion, violate the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination by annexing large parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, by displacing the Palestinian population, depriving Palestinians from controlling their natural resources, preventing Palestinians from determining their political status, and pursuing economic, social, and cultural development, and violating other human rights. The court, in that opinion, concluded that the prolonged character of Israel's unlawful policies and practices aggravates their violation of the right to Palestinian self-determination. And that, then the court concludes, the State of Israel is committing an internationally wrongful act and is to bring that unlawful act to an end. And this includes then the returning of land and other immovable property, all assets and cultural property seized since 1967, dismantling the sections of the wall in the occupied Palestinian territory, evacuating settlers from all existing settlements, and allowing Palestinians who have been displaced in or from the occupied Palestinian territory during the occupation. I'm saying this all out loud because when the question later arises, like, what should we do? What's the possible solution? The ICJ is giving you a lot of material here, right? A lot of legal material here that the ICJ considers to be jus cogens. Okay, there's no way to maneuver around it if we still want to take international law seriously, with which at least European liberal democracies still plead to take serious. So I'm not talking about the US here. So judging Israel under international law is of critical importance to those directly and enduringly affected by what have been characterized as the state's long-standing policies and practices of structural discrimination and domination, and these include also the entrenchment of ethno-national supremacy, most notably codified in the 2018 Israeli nation-state bill passed by the Israeli government and upheld by Israeli Supreme Court. And this bill grants the right to self-determination exclusively to the Jewish people and accords constitutional significance to Jewish settlement expansion only. There is no reference made to self-determination of Palestinians, normative principles of equality, or the promise, not even the lip service, the liberal promise of non-discrimination. So such legal and policy frameworks underpin what numerous international legal bodies and scholars, as well as the ICJ, have identified as a regime of apartheid and racial segregation. Now, I'm going to skip just a bit. So judging Israel also matters for those who have suffered the wave of persecution and crackdowns on human rights defenders, peace activists, students, academics, workers, professionals, and others perpetrated by liberal democratic governments, police agencies, the private sector, and educational institutions. So you obviously see that judging Israel has a lot to do with how other countries in the world, all countries, most countries in the world, are now redirecting their practice of liberal rights, or rather the shrinking space of what, and the chilling effects on who can exercise these fundamental rights. So it matters to those that insist on the full protection of the fundamental and human rights of free expression, opinion, assembly, and association, artistic and academic rights, as well as the right to defend human rights without harassment, retaliation, or persecution. So we have to think about Israel as more of just this territory between the river and the sea, but almost Israel as part of, the global Israel, the bigger Israel, as it affects the rights of people outside of Israel. Now, this is all well and good, except for the fact that Israel has made it very clear that it is not interested in upholding international law. In fact, it has not implemented a single provisional measure as laid down in the genocide case, and it has stepped up violence and killing and dispossession of Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So it seems crucial to attest that judging Israel at this moment comes as a heavy price for Palestinians living under Israeli rule, whether in the occupied Palestinian territory or inside Israel. So does it matter or does it not matter? And despite the increasing horrors, Israel's commitment to demolish the architecture of international law, its norms and institutions, especially by pressuring also the International Criminal Court for issuing arrest warrants against Israeli politicians, it does matter because it shifts attention to somewhere else. Judging Israel creates third state obligations and obligations on all UN bodies, both regarding genocide and the unlawful occupation, annexation, segregation, and apartheid. Now, third state obligation means, and here the UN Genocide Convention comes back in, because it's built on two elements, namely to prevent and to punish genocide. And under international law, all states have a duty to prevent acts of genocide, and it's not necessary for a definitive determination that genocide is taking place. The ICJ held in Bosnia versus Serbia 2007, quote, a state's obligation to prevent and the corresponding duty to act arise at the instant that the state learns of, or should normally have learned of, the existence of a serious risk that genocide will be committed. So all the international states already have an obligation to act. There's a third state obligation here. And in fact, the court in Bosnia versus Serbia held that states with strong political links to the state concerned have a greater duty to use their influence in this regard, as the duty to prevent varies from state to state. So the capacity to prevent genocide itself depends, amongst other things, on the geographical distance of the state concerned from the scene of the events and on the strength of the political links. So think here Egypt, think here Germany, right? Geographical distance, political links. That makes, for instance, these two countries particularly kind of, they have a particular kind of strong duty to prevent. And in the ICJ advisory opinion from July 2024, again, the ICJ concludes, quote, that all states are under an obligation not to recognize as legal the situation arising from the unlawful presence of the State of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, and not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation. So there's lots of concepts, but there's also kind of, a way out. If you're asking a way out, you're well advised to read the ICJ decisions here. And states are obligated not to recognize any territorial or sovereignty claims. And here it's actually referring to the principle of non-recognition in the case of the legal consequences for states of the continued presence of South Africa in Namibia. So each state is obliged to undertake a thorough due diligence review of its aid and assistance and determine whether it's being used by Israel to support and maintain the unlawful occupation. And the position paper of the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry also concludes, quote, the Commission finds that all states are on notice that Israel may be or is committing internationally wrongful acts in both its conduct and in the military operations in Gaza and its unlawful occupation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Thus, the Commission finds that unless states cease their aid and assistance to Israel in the commission of these acts, those states shall be deemed to be complicit in those internationally wrongful acts. So this is all not about Israel. It's about third state obligations, right? So the shift becomes, if Israel is announcing, we don't care for what the ICJ says, we actually are putting pressure on the ICC, it becomes increasingly clear that other countries have to step up if they don't want to declare the end of international law. So I'm going to finish with 2 points here, which is that, of course, while the ICJ and the genocide case, the South Africa versus Israel case, might take another couple of years to come up with its final decision, there is, in the meantime, a court of public opinion forming. So there's another court forming in the meantime next to the Gaza Tribunal in Sarajevo, modeled after the Russell Tribunal on the Vietnam War or the World Tribunal on the US war in Iraq. So what we're witnessing at the same time, while the ICJ is actually providing all this material, we're witnessing a total failure of the organized international community to implement international law in very severe crimes of atrocities, actually with the use of artificial intelligence, live-streamed every day. And this is why there is a legally informed public, like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the European Center for Human and Constitutional Rights, human rights clinics all over the US and South Africa and the UK in particular, as well as an increasing number of genocide and Holocaust scholars that cannot but consider these acts and intentions voiced to constitute genocide. So we're talking actually about one major court, but also the court of public opinion. Judging Israel is not important because it will undo the irreparable harm to the Palestinian people. We know that no court decision has ever prevented or even stopped a genocide. But judging Israel is important because we know that the next genocide is in the making, and other heads of states worldwide are watching Israel and want to know what Israel can get away with. So judging Israel is important, as otherwise we see the normalization of genocide, including the intentional destruction of all sources and systems of food, water, healthcare, education, etc. So right now, it's either judging Israel or declaring the end of the international liberal legal order as established in 1945. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nadine, for making this very clear presentation of. I have to apologize. This being Shabbat, I cannot use a mic. So I just have to speak up. I do hope you can hear me. I'm uncomfortable with the presence of mics.
I thank Kostek because normally he doesn't use any technology on Shabbat.
Electric is forbidden.
But
a hammer is okay.
But he agreed to do a Zoom conversation and
yeah. So
that mic.
I am slightly uncomfortable with this, and obviously I cannot use a laptop to cite chapter and verse, but I think that you made a great job in presenting the position of the International Court of Justice. I would like to start off with looking at whether in fact we are judging Israel or accusing and condemning it with judgment, be it of the legal variety or of the intellectual variety, not necessarily playing a major role. Israel has sometimes been called the country that violates most UN resolutions, and this is absolutely true. The reason for that is that no other country has so many UN resolutions directed against it. A full 25% of all condemnatory resolutions ever passed by the UN General Assembly or UN agencies is directed against Israel. In the UN Human Rights Council, this exceeds 50%. And this is not something that happened just in the last couple of years. It has been a consistent policy of the UN, which leads one to think that either 25% of all the evil in the world is concentrated between Akko and Eilat, or maybe there is another mechanism at play, and I think that mechanism is pretty obvious. Of the UN's 193 members, 67 states are members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which is anti-Israel because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, that's a very natural position for the Organization of the Islamic Conference to be, and it is hardly surprising that if a bloc of 30% of votes in the UN is anti-Israel, then other UN member states need to deal with that bloc in order to let other issues be addressed and voted. As in any other parliamentary body, and the UN General Assembly is a parliamentary body of sorts, ad hoc coalitions are being made on the principle that if you support a cause that is important to me, I'll support a cause that's important to you. And this, of course, provides a multiplier effect for the position of the Organization of Islamic Conference. This accounts for the huge number of resolutions passed to condemn Israel, which in itself would not be so terribly important if not for the fact that the International Court of Justice, whose case against Israel as brought by South Africa has been very correctly described by Nadine. Thank you once again. And that court bases its findings on documents provided by the UN. It obviously does not have an investigative body of its own, and it relies on resolutions, documents, and findings by different UN bodies. There is reason to believe that the fact that the UN has passed so many anti-Israel resolutions, that possibly documents produced in the case of Israel by UN bodies might not necessarily always meet the strict demands of objectivity one would expect such documents to meet. And in fact, we've got Francesca Albanese, who is the special rapporteur on the situation of Palestinians, who not only has already decided that Israel is committing genocide, but also believes that Israel does not have the right to self-defense beyond its borders. It condemned Israeli reaction to the October 7 massacre by Hamas, saying that Israel had the right to react within its borders, not to attack Hamas beyond its borders. It is a legitimate position to take unless one is a rapporteur on an issue which has a direct bearing on what this opinion represents. Needless to say, Francesca Albanese remains rapporteur. The UN rapporteur on genocide had actually a different perspective on the issue of what's happening in Gaza and refused to call what's happening in Gaza a genocide. She is no longer UN rapporteur for genocide. When the seat of the chairman of the ICJ became vacant, normally it would have been natural that the deputy chair of that body would assume that function. However, that particular judge, Judge Semutina from Uganda, was not elected chair because she has, as a Christian Zionist, strong pro-Israeli feelings. And I think this is an absolutely logical decision to take. Until you think of the fact that the person she was supposed to replace, the previous chairman of the International Court of Justice, Mr. Noah Salam, was vacated this position to become Prime Minister of Lebanon, a country which is at war with Israel. Nobody had any doubts about the validity of his fulfilling the role as chairman of the National Court of Justice when the South African case was brought to court. All this indicates to me, at least, that there is an inbuilt bias within the UN against Israel, which might affect both the validity of the proceedings of the International Court of Justice, but more general, does impact the Court of International Opinion that you rightly mentioned, which largely has already decided that Israel is guilty. And frankly, I don't find this terribly surprising. In no other international conflict has there been so much public attention, so much media attention, so much taking position as in the case of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And for somebody who is an unbiased observer of events, this huge amount of attention paid is clearly indication that this is an extraordinary matter. Otherwise, why the extraordinary attention? One of my students once wrote a paper on how many dead do you need in Kashmir to get the amount of coverage in the New York Times that you would get in Gaza. And it roughly is 15.1 to 1. That is, you have to have more than 15 deaths in Kashmir to get the kind of coverage that one death in Gaza gets you in the New York Times. Now, it would be easy to say that since this attitude is biased, this means Israel does not have a case to answer for. No. As you rightly stress, it is the right of any state to submit a case against any other state if they believe that fundamental international law is being violated. And certainly South Africa, if it believed that Israel is violating the Convention on Genocide, had the right to submit such a case. However, it then demands explanation why no other case on accusation of genocide was brought to the ICJ. We did not have accusations of genocide in the war in Tigray, in northern Ethiopia, with the death toll assessed at 600 to 700,000 dead. Not in Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, not in the civil war in Syria, not in the war in Sudan, which the former rapporteur on genocide considered genocidal, not in the case of South Sudan, when she believes a genocide is incipient.
Caustic, and my role as policewoman here, you have 5 minutes.
Yes, I realize that. And
Just to start.
right, there is the very well argued advisory opinion on Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. No such advisory opinion exists on the Turkish occupation of northern Cyprus, Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara, nor did one exist on the Armenian occupation of Nagorno-Karabakh, nor does one exist on the Indian occupation of Kashmir. It clearly shows that it is not so much the issue as the alleged perpetrator that decides. And this goes beyond the UN. A group of EU states has introduced a motion to the European Commission to ban trade with Israeli settlements in the West Bank as inconsistent with the European Union's position on occupation. And that's a very consistent position to take. In fact, the EU has an embargo on imports from northern Cyprus, which is occupied by Turkey. However, Cyprus itself is an EU member. It will be very difficult for the EU not to have a position on the occupation of the territory of a member state. There was no EU position on imports from Nagorno-Karabakh. And not only there is no EU position on imports from occupied Western Sahara, but to the contrary, the EU engages in international relations with Morocco regarding the exploitation of natural resources of Western Sahara. Again, a clear example of the very same actions that Israel is accused of, and which in this case never get prosecuted. The accusation of genocide, obviously, remains to be proven. But it has already been concluded in the Tribunal of Public Opinion, as seen in reports by respected human rights organizations. Amnesty International has decided that Israel has committed genocide, and it argues that although international law demands proof of intent to commit genocide, the fact that an action which can be considered genocide might also have other objectives, such as military objectives, is not proof that genocide is not being committed. Therefore, the fact that Israel says that the actions which have entailed the death of thousands of Gazan civilians are necessary in fighting the military adversary, Hamas, is not a valid argument, because you can have a valid military goal and still commit genocide. But in all genocides we know, both arguments were used. The Germans argued that Jews constitute an ally of the plutocracies and of the Soviets. Therefore, they need to be exterminated as enemies to the Third Reich. The Armenians were exterminated by Turkey as Putin. They were in fact real allies of Russia that invaded from the north. Tutsi in Rwanda were exterminated because they were accused of supporting the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front, which was trying to overthrow the genocidal regime. What this attempt does is to remove the necessity of proving intent as the sole reasonable explanation of actions that are being under accusation, and therefore to change the definition of genocide. If we change it in that way, World War II becomes a war of mutual genocide. There no longer would be any difference between the bombing of German and Japanese cities and Auschwitz. Now, legal definitions can be changed. The definition of rape was changed, and I think that this was for the better. The question is condemning Israel a goal so worthy that it necessitates making allies guilty of genocide just to keep it consistent? I would just add to this that this is an issue that seems to have limited such accusations. Human Rights Watch accuses Israel of acts of genocide, which might or might not be true. And the International Criminal Court, which is a separate court to the National Court of Justice, accused Israeli Prime Minister and Israeli Minister of Defense of war crimes and crimes against humanity, but not of genocide. Although I don't think anybody would accuse the prosecutor Khan of the National Court of Justice of being particularly pro-Israeli. Therefore, the fact that it has been acquired by public opinion that Israel is guilty of genocide is an error of judgment, both in the legal sense and in the intellectual sense.
Thank you. Avrum, please.
Shabbat shalom, peace on you, Susan, prospect, Mahed. I mean, sorry to miss you, but...
So am I.
I would like to begin with an apology that I'm going to depart or disagree with both of you. In a sense that we have two issues here, judging and Israel. So let's talk about first judging, and then about Israel, and then maybe about something which is in between. As about judging, I don't really care about all these legal pilpulim, splitting hair between is it genocide, or is it a crime, is it the process was okay, the process was not okay. I ask myself, what is my ethical, moral position? Is there any in the world, even today, the actual reality, existential threat? Was there any existential threat that justifies the killing of something between 50 to 100,000 people in Gaza, many of them innocent, 17,000 children? There is no reason, there is no legality about it. It's, as Mama used to say, it's past stage, it's not to be done. What I care about the legal definition of the stuff is morally it's corrupted. And for something like that, for whatever is happening in Gaza today, you should judge and sentence politicians, executioners, and maybe that might be included because I did not succeed to prevent it. Now, what is the framework of this whole situation? I will say that anything that Israel did to the Palestinians in the 100 years old or 100 years long conflict does not justify the first step of atrocity committed by Hamas on October 7th. And whatever Hamas exercised and committed in October 7th does not justify the crimes and the ethical violation of ethics that Israel is exercising and performing in Gaza ever since. These are two wrongs that do not balance and do not cancel each other and should be addressed as such. And from my point of view, my country is a morally corrupt country with the kind of atrocities it performs. Now, when it comes to the issue of legality, the universality of laws and principles, you have to judge each and every society according to the same measurements, according to the same rules. And therefore, when somebody says, listen, yes, I argue about genocide, and yes, I argue about crime against humanity, but deep inside, I would like to annihilate or to cancel Israel, it's not a part of the dialogue. Because when you look at the roots, at the seeds, at the nucleus of so many societies around the world today, so many nation states around the world today, at the seed of it, and sometimes a major chunk of the history is about this kind of crimes, this kind of bad actions and bad behavior. So it's not about judging somebody about the past. You want to cancel me, I will not talk to you. You want to talk to me about a better present and a better future, I'm your partner. And therefore, first and foremost, I as an Israeli would like my country and would like my people to sanctify the basic principles of universal human rights. Not just the rights of the individual, but the rights of the collective, as long as these rights do not include the right to annihilate me. So when I see the space between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, I do not count states. I count rights. And from my point of view, every individual between the Jordan River and the sea has the right for the same rights. This is the foundation, this is the ground floor upon which every other structure, political or geopolitical, should be built. Now, when we come to Israel, not about the universality of the principles, I say that the topic of Peter a few hours ago about AI is a wrong one. When it comes to us, it should be not AI, but AJ, which is artificial Judaism. What we have today in Israel, and most part of the Jewish world today, is a mutation of classic Judaism. It's an artificial creation which is a very, very dangerous one, both for itself, for Jewish history, and maybe even for the betterment of the world as such. And then people say, yes, but Avrum, but we had the Holocaust. And therefore we are over cautious, and therefore we are over careful, and therefore we are over even obsessed. And I say, hey, everything is allowed because we had the Holocaust. Was the Holocaust exceptional, or was the Holocaust part of a bigger picture of people annihilating people? Was the Holocaust just a unique thing that happened to us and we are unique forever? Or is it something that was the last awful, disastrous link in a chain that started maybe with the perishment of the native nations in North America and continued with however in Southwest Africa, and then everybody was indifferent to whatever happened in 1915 to the Armenians in Turkey, and then came our turn. Whatever happened to us was part of a larger situation of humanity, that people killed people and people tried to exterminate people. And therefore, the outcome of the Holocaust, which said Raphael Lemkin and others, we should have an international norm that prevent this kind of 18th, 19th, 20th century atrocities. This is something that we should keep in mind, and Jews are not exceptional. We are part of the rule, we are not exceptional, neither as victims, nor as victimizers, especially when it comes to these norms. However, when we come to judge Israel, because that's the topic of the day that the Einstein Forum tries to put us to trial, I would say Israel should be measured according to three measurements. First, Israel compared to the expectation of Jewish history. What Jewish history expected when it was dreaming about independence. Another topic for the day. The second is Israel compared to the standards it itself set for itself. And when Israel says we are the only democracy in the Middle East, let's measure it. When you say we are the most moral army in the world, tell me how it works. Tell me what was the control group. Tell me what are the measurements. What are the values according to which you made this study. And if you go just for the cliche, it's a hollow one. It's empty. And the last but not least is Israel compared to the global and international community. Now, Costas, when you say the UN passes so many resolutions, of course it passes so many resolutions. Because Israel allegedly claims to be part of the liberal democratic universe. And therefore Israel is the only country in the OECD and the only state in the Western liberal democratic realm that denies the natural democratic rights of an entire collection, from the democratic birthrights of the Palestinians. So what do you expect? You want to be like Iran, nobody will discuss you. You want to compare yourself to Yemen, go there. But don't hold the stick from both sides. If you want to be part of the global moral value system, behave accordingly. so violent. I would say it's not about the norms. The norms are okay. I would say that we should pay attention to two elements. The first is the Middle East and its so many conflicts, not just ours, but ours in particular, are the poisonous fruits of two undealt with Western world or European world problems, colonialism and the Holocaust. And as long as Europe and the West ran away and left us to deal with its poisonous fruits and does not come out a solution, there will be maybe no solution. We still live in the outcome of the 19th and 20th century wrongdoing by the West. And last but not least, there is a role of two nations. One I'm not going to address today, and this is the United States of America, especially under the current confusing or embarrassing presidency. But the second one is Germany, because yes, I'm in Zoom, but we're in Germany. So many of German Putin's psychological and political positions are because of the atrocities it performed in the middle of the 20th century. But the very foundation of modern Germany, the other Germany, Germania, are based on what happened to the Jews, which means as long as the Jew is a victim, Germany is Germany. And Germany cannot psychologically, that's a large spot of current Germany, cannot accept Israel as a victimizer. And as long as Germany cannot accept the wrongdoing of Israel today, and Israel is doing wrongs, Germany is not there, and as said your chancellor, or the chancellor said, we do the dirty job for the Europeans. Israel will continue to perform because there is no EU foreign policy without Germany, and there is no Germany without the concept of a Jew as an eternal victim which justifies it all. And I say no. The credit of the Holocaust should not be used so cynically and should not be used to weaponize anti-Semitism in order to reach every legitimate, legal, moral, and ethical criticism that Israel deserves. And only did we accept it so many years ago, we would not have found ourselves today in a discussion like that in Potsdam. Thank you.
Thank you. I think according to the fair rules of controversial panels, that each of you should be allowed just a couple of minutes to respond to what's been said before we turn to a public discussion.
Can you hear me well? Yes, I'm happy to start. Two things here. So appealing to morals and ethics, I would love not to talk about the law. One of the reasons I talk about the law is because I'm talking in Germany, and law used to be a hard currency with which you could talk, right? So it would give you a kind of binding nature of what it is, of analyzing the phenomenon we're seeing. With the Verfassungspatriotismus of Habermas, with the Völkerrechtsfreundlichkeit, the friendliness towards international law as enshrined in Article 25 of the German Constitution. A hard currency beyond, or not beyond discourse, but, give us something binding that we can discuss. And now this hard currency is coming under very hard attack in Germany, both concerning the constitutional order as well as the international order. So I'd rather talk about morals, but that puts me in a very difficult position in Germany. But it makes it also difficult to talk about morals and ethics because the extent to which the Palestinians have been dehumanized shows that morals and ethics is not even a currency that can be leveraged. Because to get to the stage, to not even blink with an eye when all hospitals in Gaza have been bombed, or all schools, or all universities, this is why actually we owe it to the humanities for providing new concepts that the law could not. Scholasticide, urbanicide, domicide, ecocide, herbicide, So the humanities have given us concepts to enrich, if you want, our legal understanding of genocide. And Also, maybe I'm not willing to give up on the law because what we have in international is very much an interpretation of the very concrete and historical suffering of Jews in Germany. That suffering has been translated into a legal concept, genocide, right? It's also an interpretation, or sorry, an interpretative product and outcome to translate the suffering of black South Africans from something they concretely experienced, apartheid, into a legal concept. So it's not as if law is not part and parcel of the sweat and blood of many people that they historically and presently suffered, that then is being used from the particular, coining that as universal concepts. That's actually very much also part and parcel of Jewish history, I understood. You know, to protect the particular by pleading to the international. That's very much a kind of marginalized story of marginalized people, right? So I mean, I just want to warn you a bit, doing away with the law. And if you wanted to say, you don't care for these interpretations, so I just want to for a moment also recall that Palestinian human rights individuals and human rights organizations for a very long time, when they considered something to be a violation of Israeli law or international law, they would go and plead to the Israeli Supreme Court. And they did so many times. Until they also realized that that's not helping us, right? We keep on, the Supreme Court is also not doing what it's supposed to do. One of the recent decisions of the Israeli Supreme Court is declaring legal that humanitarian aid is not entering Gaza, right? So it's not the rescue of the liberal democracy. But what I wanted to say is that the reason why Palestinians started, and not only Palestinians together with the Israeli peers, so the NGOs, is to go to the International Criminal Court is because they saw the Israeli judicial system failing them over and over again, and the situation just getting worse and worse. That's what got the Gaza 2014 military situation before the International Criminal Court. So we already have cases pending on crimes against humanity and war crimes before the International Criminal Court, except for the fact that the International Criminal Court, it took it 7 years to decide to open preliminary investigation, and it still hasn't started with the preliminary investigation. So if you want to say, so what I want to say is we got into the situation right now precisely because neither the Israeli judicial system was serving justice, nor the International Criminal Court. So if you think it doesn't matter, then you basically, so if you think it doesn't matter, this very necessary distinction between genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity, you're basically just saying, forget about the genocide case before the ICJ, go back to the International Criminal Court, which is where many NGOs just came from, only realizing that the International Criminal Court is also not doing its job, right? So precisely because the International Criminal Court was not doing its job, it enriched this atmosphere of impunity. Let's bump and see what happens, and that's what got us into the genocide case with all the ugly statements. We didn't talk much about the intent, but especially for those who know Hebrew, but even the translations we have in English, it brings back all this, if you do race studies, by declaring people to be human animals, by, cutting them off, saying that you would cut them off electricity, fuel, food, etc., and then acting upon it, by destroying this distinction between civilians and non-civilians, by saying there are no innocent people in Gaza. All these statements, they're out there, right? So it's painful when you do race studies, when you study anti-Semitism, when you study Orientalism, to see all of this in like a database of like 500 statements that Israeli officials, partly in command authorities, were saying, So it's really difficult not to hear, not to read, not to see. It feels like all the senses, are being affected right now. And really, again, don't do away with the law.
Somewhat to my surprise, I find myself on many points in agreement with Nadine and in disagreement with Avrum. First of all, I think you're absolutely right. The law is crucial. And this is why, if there are reasons to suspect that the law is being administered in an unfair way, this is so important. And no, I do not think that the law is something that is reserved only for the best pupils of the class. That the reason there are so many anti-Israeli resolutions, as you said, Avrum, is that, well, Israel aspires to be a Western liberal democracy. I think that Turkey, although it is probably a less perfect democracy than Israel, fully deserves to be judged the way that Israel is being judged for its treatment of its Kurdish minority. I believe that India, although a democracy, fully deserves to be judged for the treatment it inflicts on the Kashmiris, and so on and so forth. The only way to divide states into those who merit the full attention of international law and those who don't is divide them into better and worse. I mean, yes, Israel is almost like us, it's almost European, almost white, almost liberal, therefore we will accuse it. And frankly, Turkey or Iran, you know those people, what could you expect? That's outrageous. That's totally outrageous. I refuse to accept it. And I agree with you that the law needs to be implemented, but then what you called pilpurim are important. The law is procedural. If the courts of law do not themselves apply the law that is binding upon them, trust in their verdicts has to fall. Israel has challenged the right of the International Criminal Court to prosecute Israel because of a number of procedural issues. This was first peremptorily rejected, then upon appeal, the court has decided that the Israeli position has to be studied once again. But more importantly, in the procedure in the International Criminal Court, the fundamental principle is one of complementarity. That court intervenes only when the justice of the country that was supposed to act either is unwilling or unable to do so. In the case of Venezuela, when charges of crimes against humanity were made against the government of Venezuela, accused of murdering political opponents in its jail cells, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court went to Caracas, had very fruitful meetings with the Venezuelan government, and decided that Venezuela probably is going to investigate and prosecute, so there is no reason to demand for arrest warrants for Venezuelan ministers accused of those crimes. This was not offered to the Israeli side. There was never a visit by Khan to the Israeli Justice Ministry to see if Israel is willing to investigate the crimes it is being accused of. Now, we do not know what evidence Prosecutor Khan has against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant, because the contents of the indictment is secret. But it is very plausible that, that the court has enough proof to indict those two politicians for war crimes. There's plenty of evidence of that in the media, in reports of international organizations. And it is plausible that crimes against humanity might have also been committed. But to argue that, one does not need to resort to truncated quotations like the one about human animals, which is used only in part. The first part of that statement made it clear that the minister was speaking about Hamas, not about Palestinians or Gazans in general. Now, I do believe that this kind of extremely confrontational language does not behoove politicians of a democratic country. But sadly, if you look at what Ukrainian politicians are saying about Russia, Russian politicians about Ukraine, or Indian and Pakistani politicians about each other and their respective nations, you find the same kind of rhetoric. This does not excuse it. And I agree that those prosecutors should be prosecuted. And if they are not, then international justice should intervene. But this does not make it proof of any kind of sinister intent. And two more comments just to conclude. On the one hand, I'm very worried that this tendency to make accusations of genocide will have, as a result, a banalization of the term. We've already seen it in the White House when President Trump accused the visiting South African president of genocide against white farmers in Africa. Grotesque accusation, but I think psychologically made possible also by the fact that the accusation is being so used so freely and so limitlessly. But Avrum, this has nothing to do with the Shoah. This is not, the Shoah has no bearing on this case. The fact that Jews were victims of genocide does not preclude the possibility that we might be perpetrators. Being a victim does not ennoble, does not prevent from doing horrible things. Serbs had been a victim of genocide in World War II, and Bosnian Serb nationalists committed the act of genocide at Srebrenica. The reason why I think that Israel is not committing genocide is that the Israeli actions do not meet the legal definition. But the fact that we have been victims of a genocide is simply irrelevant to this case. What is relevant is the legal definition. As long as we respect the law and its procedures, including the Pilpuri, then we may hope to make progress.
Let's give Avrum a couple of minutes, and then I would like to say something.
I'll be more than happy if next year Einstein Forum will dedicate some time to discuss the Holocaust, the Shoah, as a centerpiece of Israeli psyche. I'd be very interesting discussion. And I hope this time there will be no war, so I'll come to discuss it. But having said that, I would say, if you said earlier that in Germany the law is the currency, this was the term?
Yes.
So I would say in Israel the law is much more like a Bitcoin. It's virtual. In the sense you have one law for Jews and one military law for the Arabs in the occupied territories. For the Jews within Israel, the legal system, the juridical system completely collapsed. Completely collapsed under so many pressures from legalizing and kosherizing the settlements and the actions of the settlers through permitting and allowing the mass collateral killing in Gaza and in other places, up until Donald Trump interfered in the legal procedure against the Prime Minister of Israel. There is no legal, functioning, real legal system in Israel. There is none. And even if we had one, and I would have trusted it, say, I hate the reality, I'm sorry, it's too strong of a word. I cannot stand, I do not want to accept the situation that everything is judged or everything is valued through the prism. Is it criminal or is it not criminal? If it's not criminal, it's kosher. During the war in Gaza, I went out to demonstrate against the war, of course, because that's me. Because I read Susan Eichmann's book about being a lefty is not being a wonky. Okay, right, Susan? So I read the book and I went out to demonstrate. And then shouted at me a bunch of right-wing thugs, a good shouting contest, and they say, we want to talk to you. I say the story, and then one of them said, oh, well, I understand, you are not looking left-winger, peacenik, yada, yada, yada. But I want to ask you a question. Did we set gas chambers in Gaza? I said, no, I hope not. So he said, so if there are no gas chambers, so it's okay. Like everything is compared to the absolute atrocities committed to us. And Kostak, I'm sorry to tell you, you know better than I do. You know as well as I do how much the Holocaustic mentality is at the seed of everything Israel is doing, especially what happened in October 7th that brought back so many bad memories and so many traumas back to the surface. And this is such a huge driver in the Israeli psyche. And when this is the situation that everything is compared to the absolute atrocity, and if it is not, if it is kosher, I have to fight it much before it comes to court. I don't have the time, I don't have the luxury neither as a Jew nor as a Palestinian, to wait 10 years for the court to decide whether this war was legal or not legal, was it a genocide version 1 or was it genocide 2.0. It's bad and morally has to be stopped. Then the lawyers do whatever you want. But this is a moral political obligation to go out to fight it.
I'm not going to try to split the difference, but I have a few thoughts that might bring some light or bring us closer together. Yes, I was about to say, but Avrum said it better than me, the whole country was protesting in public, the judicial system, for the last couple of years. So the idea that somehow the UN should have trusted the Israeli courts when Nader was saying, we tried. I know we tried. I mean, David Schulman has been trying for years and years to help the people that he shepherds on the occupied West Bank. Occasionally they win a court case. So I don't think that Avrum was saying that law doesn't matter, and I appreciate, Nader, if we don't have much, and as you rightly said in beginning your presentation, people states violate international law all the time, but it's what we have. We should hang on to it. And I think you're absolutely right that a point on which we might, there are 2 points, and this is why I agree with both of you, which we might conceivably get the Germans, although I'm increasingly dubious about that. The one is that one of the lessons they claim to have learned from the Holocaust is about the importance of international law and human rights law. So holding that up to them as against what they have actually learned, and here Avrum, I fear, is absolutely right. What they've actually learned is, gosh, we were perpetrators. We denied it for 40 years. Now we learned that we are das Tätervolk, die Täternation. But if that's who we fundamentally are, then the Jews are fundamentally the victim people, okay? And Avrum's probably most famous book is called The Holocaust is Over, a great title. So I think, I share that with both of you. I want to say a word about I think what you were saying, Avrum, when you said you don't care about the difference between genocide and a war crime, I agree that a lot of ink has been wasted on that question. I think people who I respect a lot have changed their views. I basically followed Omer Bartov on that score, who said it looks like it could be, but it isn't yet, and then a year ago said, intention, do we think there's no systemic racism? Do we think you have to say, I hate people of color in order to be functionally racist? We don't. So I think that pushing too hard on intention is, we don't, intention is, as Immanuel Kant said, I rarely get out of these things without quoting him at least once. Immanuel Kant said, we don't even know our own intentions, okay? Pardon?
Didn't Freud say that?
Well, if he did, Kant said it first. Okay. No, he said, we don't know. So that's not what we have access to. What we have access to is our judgment and how we act in the world. And I take it that that's one thing you can learn from Arendt, moving away from intention to what she called the banality of evil, even if it turned out not to be true of the man Adolf Eichmann. But this is where then I not surprisingly have to come down with Avrum because, you know, in my weird 3 nationalities, passports, whatever it is, I am fundamentally aware, increasingly aware every day, that it's not the best constitution in the world. We know that that was South Africa's constitution, but the best a good beginning of a constitution by the founding fathers that thought, you know, we're not naive. We know that there'll be bad actors. We'll build a system of checks and balances and, you know, see if we can be both, let me say, structured hope and cautious something. What was your quote about writing a constitution being a matter of, I don't know, cautious hope and structured caution or something like that? It was much better. Sorry, I forgot. But this is where I am so conscious in these last months that without moral judgment, the best constitution in the world, or the best laws in the world, is probably worth nothing. Before we open the conversation, I just want to shout out, Avrum has been fast and furiously writing a Substack, and to those New Yorkers who were wondering why the rest of the world was so excited about the New York mayor contest, Avrum wrote a piece that began by using biblical language, justice will flow out of New York like a righteous stream or something, and ended by quoting Leonard Cohen, first we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. So, I mean, this is, you know, look, the Jewish people is split. This actually might be a subject for a longer conversation, but the universalist tradition in Judaism is, you know, it's the one that I adhere to. It's the one that Avrum adheres to. In many ways, I know that Caustic does, otherwise we wouldn't be friends, even when I disagree with you. I know that about you. Okay. My guess is that a lot of people will have comments and questions for one or all of the panelists, and we can't go on all afternoon. Who would like to start?
Thank you. I would like to take the bridge between moral ethics and justice. Konstanty, even if other countries are bad and are committing crimes, it doesn't make it better for Israel. Not morally, not in terms of justice. And even if, yes, I think that's the main point. Comparison is just needless. It doesn't make any sense. And every single crime stands for its own in our world. So comparison is just, forgive me, rhetoric.
Yes.
This is not the point I was making at all. What I was saying is that we have an international justice system that is willing to prosecute Israel for the very same things it's not willing to prosecute somebody else. This does not make the alleged crime any better. It undermines trust in that justice system. And this is not a technical detail. I want to make sure that if I get in front of the court of law, I can have a reasonable degree of trust in that court of law. And for that, that court of law needs to obey the law. And for this reason, it's not indifferent whether it is only a war crime or as much as genocide. Because given the choice, I'd rather be ethnically cleansed than finally solved. Because ethnically cleansed, I might have a chance to survive. Finally solved, I won't. This makes the difference between genocide and non-genocide, be it another crime, of fundamental importance. And this is why it is not a trivial thing.
Let them work.
Albie.
I'm going to speak directly to you. It's very often that I speak as a Jew. I am a Jew. In fact, I'll be in Lithuania next week as a Litvak getting a presidential award, and my heart will be beating because my family were liquidated there, and Lithuanians don't take responsibility. They blame the Russians, they blame the Germans, and I have to find a way of communicating that. My Jewishness is based on idealism, on empathy, on connection with people who've historically been persecuted, who've known pain for being who they are. It's deep in me. It came with my mother's milk and my father's jokes. And what causes me pain above everything else, these are not abstractions. If we need corroboration, just tonight open CNN, Sky News, I think any news service in the world except in Israel.
Haaretz, don't
And-
forget. Haaretz is still
Right.
recording.
And you'll read 30 people were killed since dawn this morning. 75 people were killed. It's happening now. There are 1,000 trucks with food waiting to come in. They can't come in. People clamoring for food. They're frantic. They're being shot. And there's legal argument about instructions given or not. One of the points that the court made was it's not the duty of the court to wait until genocide is completed before it can make a finding of genocide. That the international community must intervene when genocidal acts that can lead to that are happening. And if people have to rely on definitions that somehow say, well, we're only mass murderers, we only war criminals, but don't call it genocide. It's like claiming that only we Jews or Armenians can speak that language if it's not intended overtly to be extermination. And even there we hear the word extermination, exterminating Hamas, exterminating the leadership, exterminating evil. That horrible word is used. And you can never exterminate because it's ideals, it's patriotism, it's chauvinism, it's hatred, it's a whole range of different things. And then what does cause me so much anguish now, I feel my own Jewishness is being challenged.
Yes.
My own Jewishness. And I have a right to claim my Jewishness, to claim that idealism, to claim that passion and compassion and sense of humanity, and to say, this is terrible, how can these things be going on and on and on and on? It's never ending, never ending, never ending. And what saddens me is so many friends of mine who are progressive, decent-minded, fair people who supported our freedom struggle in South Africa. Somehow when it comes to Israel and what's happening there, their sensitivity is deadened. That deep morality that to me identified my culture, my background, that fed into the background of other people being persecuted is being denied. So I'm saying this with, in a way, respect for your courage to come into fairly hostile terrain to represent your views and doing it with efficacy. But I don't see anguish, I don't see pain, I don't see horror at something that's manifestly so ugly, that's happening all the time, happening in your name and you would like to make it happening in my name. It's not in my name.
Well, what you're essentially saying is that you claim the Jewish prophetic tradition and leave me with Bibi Netanyahu. I am not making reference to the pain, not because I do not feel it, but I do not think I have any more claim to that pain than any other member of the human race. I think it's the most elementary assumption that we all feel the pain when there is suffering. It's not a Jewish thing, it's a human thing. I also assume that many Palestinians feel the pain that Israelis felt when their families were slaughtered. I can't imagine it to be otherwise. I do not give myself the right to speak in the name of that pain as if I had better claim to it than anybody else. I don't. I speak because I believe that and here I very strongly agree with Nadia, and I want to apologize for mispronouncing your name. It's not an easy afternoon, okay? But I'm sorry. I share your belief that if there is any hope, it might be in the low. Or maybe there is no hope, I do not know. But if there is, it might be in the low. And this is why I think the low needs to be treated with the utmost seriousness. And this is why, yes, I will take what you said. We are only war criminals. We are not génocidaires. To the extent that the horror is being committed also in my name, yeah, you can call me that. Call me a war criminal. Don't call me a génocidaire. And it is deeply, I believe, deeply unfair to claim that anybody has a better right to speak in the name of the pain any human being would feel. We almost had this conversation 25 years ago in Gaza, remember? Yeah. I had an argument with a Palestinian militant, and we eventually ended up hugging to our mutual surprise. And Albie told me, don't push your luck, okay? He hugged me, that's wonderful. And I thought, well, human beings who feel emotion and pain, that's what they do, okay? I hug people. And I don't expect this to be the last step of the conversation. So, for all the horror and pain, I still believe it's important to make distinctions. I still believe it's important to nitpick. And no, even though the Israeli justice system is under attack, it is not a small thing that Palestinians could also win in the Israeli court of law. And I do believe that Israeli justice, which had sent to jail a prime minister, a president, would have sent in another had he not died, and is investigating a third, should be accorded at least the same courtesy as the justice system of Venezuela. If the International Criminal Court can trust the justice system of Venezuela, I would argue it might also trust that of Israel. But that's it.
One word before I just ask if Avrum wants to respond. in some sense, then you're more of a universalist Jew than I am, Caustic, because, in principle, I think everybody should feel everybody else's pain and have a sort of fundamental outrage. But there's a shame question. And I am, not only feeling anguished is the word that I would use, that I'll be used, but shame. I mean, shame and almost, I could go on and on in Germany in particular, where they've forgotten that there is such a thing as a universalist Jewish tradition. But, okay, so we have three examples of it here, probably a few more. Okay, yeah. We've got a very, very small set of examples. It's not whether you feel more pain, but there's a sense of responsibility that I have. But Avrum hasn't had a chance to speak. I don't know if you wanted to respond. Oh, Nadeh, and then.
So I feel like we need a psychoanalyst here, and I think there are some in the room too, because I'm really happy. It's not okay. As a lawyer, I don't talk so much about shame. As a public lawyer, I don't use guilt so much. I use accountability, I use responsibility, and I want to talk about harm. And that also means, despite the fact that I think the conversation we're having, which is really interesting and very rich and worthwhile having, we need, at the same time, almost it seems, to decenter what is it? I don't know. Decenter the figure of the Jew, I'm not sure what it is, but can we also make space for those that are being harmed massively right now? Because this is almost going in a direction that, again, is absolutely worthwhile having, but not, again, all the question of the history, the figure of the Jew, the history of anti-Semitism, the entire history of Europe and the other, right? It's all projected on the body of the Palestinians. Within Europe, it's projected on the body of the Muslims. In Israel, it's projected on the bodies of the Palestinians. So we need to get these bodies. We need to make that kind of space. That's actually what all these campus protests are about. There needs to be that space for the principle of harm, and undoing, overcoming, accountability for that harm, right? So I just want to, I feel like I'm almost interrupting a conversation. It's really, again, interesting, right? But we cannot have any of these conversations without, at the same time, also centering the Palestinian, So I was just a bit kind of feeling uncomfortable in what direction that is going, because it's leaving, and because it's also, again, I'm happy for a psychoanalyst helping us, because I'm seeing it also in Germany. It becomes a question of narcissism. And I feel like I can't even enter the debate with legal arguments when it's me. Me, the kind of, with the moral supremacy, the kind of the pride of the perpetrator, so I go like, okay, so that's a different conversation, which is, I'm sure, important to have, right? But it's putting those that are currently being massively harmed, and again, this is Palestinians, but it's your students, it's your mental health worker, the health workers, the journalists, it's putting all these people at an immense risk. And again, I'm using also the law really practically, because we need it in everyday cases before the Berlin Administrative Court, in defending students and defending journalists, and so it's for some. So it's not benefiting the Palestinians right now in Palestine, but as we're speaking, it's relevant for people getting fired in their jobs, deportation cases, citizenship cases. So it's so multifaceted, which shows the kind of entanglements, which I described, entanglements between what's happening in Palestine, Israel, and The Hague, and the streets of Berlin, or that, for that matter, the streets of New York, right? So there is this immense entanglement of these places, and I really urge you to make space for, or I urge you not to project the entire history of, the Jewish people onto this Palestinian body.
Thank you for that reminder. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience and then go to Avrum. Or do you have something you burningly want to say now? You do. Go ahead.
Burning.
Go ahead, burn.
Psychoanalysis. I spent many years in Vienna. I was the chairman of the World Zionist Organization. And for many years I had in mind the following vision. that one Jewish doctor in Vienna in the turn of the century crosses the street and knocks on the door of the other doctor. Dr. Herzl knocks on the door of Dr. Freud and says, "Doctor, I have a problem." Maybe it might have solved retroactively our problems to begin with. But having said that, I would like to put through very brief comments, because each and every one of them is a book to be written. First, Costa, you are not left with Bibi. It's not your issue. Israel does not belong to the Jewish people. Israel belongs to the Israelis. And the Israelis are combined of 80% Jews and 20% Palestinians, and you're not part of the game. You can like it, you can visit it, you can whatever, you can love it, but it's not your country.
Feels like what Poland is telling me. So do please tell me where the hell am I supposed to go, right?
Deal with your identity. You want to be part of it, come, pay taxes, vote to the Knesset, vote for your leadership, and serve. It's impossible for any state to belong to stakeholders that are not stockholders. Impossible. Doesn't work this way. So Israel does not belong to you. I start with Bibi, not you. You have other president, your president, deal with it. Okay? The second is, I'll be the one say, Israel of today is maybe one of the most ugliest divorce ever between traditional, classical, mostly glorious Jewish civilization and the current Israeli one. The Israeli Judaism of today, as I call it, is not just a mutation of Jewish history, it's a failure of its expectations. And I'll give you just a brief little Jewish teaching. There is the famous book of the Middle Ages of Avrum, who was a philosopher and a poet, and you name it. And he wrote the Sefer HaKuzarim, which is the book of Kuzar, which is a kind of an apologetic and defending of the poor, humble, unique Judaism of the time. And he defends it in front of the king of Kuzar, who looks for the truth. And he asks him, what's the difference between you and the rest of religions? And he says, we do not kill. We're different. We're superior morally. When the king of Kuzar stopped laughing, he tells him, when thou your hand shall find it, you shall kill like the rest of the nations. Tells him the Jewish philosopher, you find my blind spot, the king of Kuzar. When the Jewish people of today in Israel, on behalf of alleged Judaism, is killing blindly, massively, crime against humanity, war crime, genocide, you be fighting for the innocent kid in Gaza, for the hungry wife or mother who cannot feed their kids in Gaza or in Nablus. It makes no difference your legal definitions. When you kill this way, I kill this way, in my country, my collective. I'm shot and being shot at. I failed the test that the Middle Ages philosophers put for me as an expectation, and all during history. And therefore, your Judaism is the right one. And the current one in Israel is eventually the one who's going to fail, like it failed the first time and failed the second time, because it is morally corrupt.
Well, I mean, I would love to leave it there, but we do have, okay, I'm going to ask for really, really short questions, really short replies, and then a final, like, minute and a half from everybody, okay? Judy Dempsey would want to say something. Wait for the mic, please.
Thank you. Avrum, Burg, you were so good when I was based in Israel. I was working for the FT at the time. It's great to see you again. I've got a question, and it's very complicated. I think the law does matter. But this is now interfering in the idea of the other. And over so many years, the other is the Palestinian, and the opposite is the Israeli Jew. And over the years, we have seen this forced separation. And you see this separation, I saw the separation with the settlements, but more importantly, the point I want to get to is that the law is selective for Israel, and the law is hardly even used positively for the Palestinians. This is the first point.
That's the definition of apartheid, as far as I.
I'm not saying that. And the second thing is that whoever mentioned demonstrations against undermining the judiciary and what Netanyahu was doing for it, I remember those demonstrations, and not once did the demonstrations look over and see what was happening in the West Bank and Gaza. This was an opportunity to actually frame those demonstrations in a much wider context. The third point is that the lady there who talked about comparisons don't matter. I think comparisons do matter, because what's happening in Hungary, what's happening in the United States, what's happening in Russia, the gradual undermining of the rule of law and accountability, this feeds into what Netanyahu may want to do. And it's up to the Israelis to see if they want accountability in the courts, and they're not there. And the last point, and I think this is incredibly sad, is that because the other is so entrenched now in the attitude that people to people doesn't exist anymore. And if people to people don't exist, and it's not even supported, and they were vilified when I was based in Israel, how on earth are you ever even going to overcome the otherness to actually deal with these hugely complicated issues? One thing about the courts, the Israelis have to do this.
Okay, quickly you, and then Peter, and then we'll wrap it up with, yes.
I'm good at that. So,
Oh, we all wait, but Nadia said she wanted a psychoanalyst. Specifically. And Avrum told a joke about the Viennese doctors, so I think we need a non-Viennese doctor to weigh in here.
Before this war, I was politically on the side of the government of Israel, but with this war, it changed completely, because I really don't understand why the Israeli government acts like it acts, because Israel calls itself a democracy, and a democracy each state can choose its means of war, and starvation of children as means of war is, well, it's horrible. It's just horrible to watch it. And I want to say, I really don't understand at all why the Israeli government acts like it acts. It's just horrible. And I just want to say, I don't understand it at all. And I wonder, do they want to, my English is very bad, do they want to abandon themselves one day? Or wollen sie sich selbst abschaffen, die israelische Regierung? So it's not a question, it's not a comment. It's a comment, because I just want to say, I don't at all understand why they act like this in this horrible way. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Peter Kramer.
I really am going to pass. Thank you.
Seriously? Okay.
May I say something, being a social psychologist, if this is accepted?
Well, if it's very short.
Yes. It's quite common that communities, societies who have to experience brutality and violence tend to do the same. We know that, and we see this every single day in conflict studies.
Okay. Nader, Kostik, Avrum, and we'll end with Albi.
Okay, so I want to think with you, how will Palestinians and Israelis, Jewish Israelis, live together one day when right now there is no people-to-people engagement, right? I think this is, obviously we're going to go back to genocide studies and find out, what does it mean for a society to reconstruct itself after it has done genocide, right? So history actually will come back and will give us some clues. Apartheid South Africa will also give us some clues, right? So this will be, in that sense, a kind of a comparative engagement that we have to start doing now, right? And again, I do want to say, repeat what I said at the beginning, so before the genocide is after the genocide is also before the genocide, right? So I'm already also bracing myself for other genocides happening somewhere else, So this genocide will be indicative for how genocides will be done in other parts of the world. So, and I think to the question of why Israel is doing what it's doing, I mean, for me, it's kind of, it's about acquiring more land and territory, right? Because this is a conflict about land, and that's, of course, also why the concept and the studies of settler colonialism is so important, because the idea of the settler colonialism is to destroy, to replace, and that's what we're seeing right now. So I do think, in fact, that Israel will succeed in acquiring all of Gaza. It already has, full control over all of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, right? And it will acquire, and has already acquired full control over the Golan Heights. It's unclear if Lebanon or, other places will also be part of the Arab Israel. So I think this is a conflict about land, and this is going to become clearer and clearer. So I'm actually waiting for settler colonialism to enter as a legal vocabulary, also in international law, to help us explain why is this happening and how do we have to overcome it. And again, I want to repeat what I said as part of my presentation. The shift is clear. It has to be a shift towards third state obligations. And Europe actually in that sense is not unified, right? Ireland, look to Spain, look to Belgium, look to Norway, for instance, right? So actually also kind of coming from studying, the Holocaust or apartheid, or, in international law, every catastrophe is an opportunity to shape new legal understandings, and to come up also, again, either with new legal terms and new legal instrumentarium, right? So this is why some of my colleagues are also proposing the Nakba as a legal term, because we can't keep on fragmenting, the genocide in Gaza, the annexation in the West Bank, It's because what we're seeing obviously is the fragmentation of Palestinian land and the fragmentation of the Palestinian as a people, So I think there is, in a way, intellectually speaking, a lot of dynamic things happening, on the legal level, on the humanities, etc. And I think this is now the time to look to third states' obligations. And in Europe, there's a lot happening. Also, when you look at the academic sphere, for instance, so people want accountability, people want responsibility. So I'm actually maybe optimistic is the wrong term, but I'm intellectually still open to see what changes this will bring.
In the Nazi bombing of Warsaw on September 24, 1939, 24,000 people were killed in one night. In the Allied bombing of Dresden in January 1945, 25,000 people were killed in one night. Since then, the technology of killing has vastly improved. Had Israel wanted to commit genocide in Gaza, Gaza would be dead. There is a reason why the Israeli government is doing what it is doing. Part of it is because of the fascist party in the coalition, which has an inordinate influence over Prime Minister Netanyahu. There is also the trivial fact that 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered on October 7th, and a democratic government has the responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen again. There is only so far we can remove ourselves from the reality of the facts. And this is the reality.
Avrum.
In one of his essays, Gerhard Scholem writes a letter which is called, an essay which is called A Letter of Response to Hannah Arendt. And I read it many, many times during the years, and I thought it was a brilliant, very eloquent response. But I never asked myself, what did she write initially in order to provoke this kind of response? With time, too late,
her letters were translated to Hebrew many, many years after it was published in German, or in German and English. And in one of them there is a letter that provoked this answer. And she says to him, he accused her, after Eichmann in Jerusalem and the banality of evil, etc., he accused her that she lost her love of Israel, Ahavat Israel. And she said, what the heck are you talking about? What the heck is my language, not her language? She was more eloquent. She was Heidegger student, not mine. Okay, so she said, what the heck are you talking about? You, the Jewish people, were born and actually were dedicated in order to fear, love, and worship God. In the 20th century, you lost the faith in God. God does not exist. So instead of loving God, you love yourself. I'm not into this self-narcissism of loving ourselves. I'm not, says Hannah Arendt, I'm not in love, and therefore I'm not a patriot of any automatic collective tribe or ethnical group. I'm committed and I'm bounded with people like-minded, value-wise and principle-wise. And when asked where the hope is coming from, for me, it's not a hope of the Jewish collective and not a hope of the Palestinian collective. It was, it is, and it will be some of us and some of us Jews and some of them Palestinians who believe in the principles of peace, justice, equality for all, ready to put the very painful competition between traumas, Nakba versus Holocaust, behind us and plan a better future, versus some Jews and some Palestinians who are eschatological, dangerous, fundamentalist, racist. And from my point of view, there is no difference, none whatsoever, on the philosophical level between Yahya Sinwar and Bezalel Smotrich. Both are my enemies. Both are my rivalries. And when time will come, that war will not be the tool for solving everything. Like I have a hammer, where are you, Mr. Nail? But it will be a time in which to reconstruct, de-radicalize, and solving some of the issues that we have between us. It will be a group of Israelis and Palestinians who believe in betterment of humanity versus those Jews and Muslims and Christians. And there are fundamentalists and dangerous fundamentalists in all three religions nowadays who try to stop the progress and the advancement of humanity the way it should be. So my hope is us and Palestinian partners together versus some of us and Palestinian partners ensemble there that we have to defeat.
Albie, take the last word, please.
A couple of months ago, I had the pleasure, Vanessa and I, of welcoming a Palestinian couple from Israel in our home. I forget his name, I'm sure it's somebody you would know. And he said, what did I think of the following proposition? One homeland, two states. I thought actually it's a brilliant proposition. And I wanted to add to that, two states with mutual interests and two strong states. The only hope for Israel is a strong Palestine. A Palestine with dignity, self-reliance, pride, the same way that so many Jews after World War II, through statehood, achieved that. Palestinians have a right to that, and I support that completely. Why do I speak about the anguish of Jews as though somehow it's more important and should be the center of attention? And I accept your critique of me completely. I welcome it as a counterbalance. Because it's only when a majority of Jewish Israelis accept that notion of one homeland, two states, and they accept it not because they are beaten, not because they're overwhelmed, they accept it because it's right. They believe in it. They believe in mutual interests, sharing so much of history, the tourism, economic development, and away from everlasting war, So it's easier for me just to remain stumm, to use a Jewish word. I engage with Israelis, and it was important in our struggle that, I say we, I'm with the black people, engaged with the whites, and held out a prospect, a vision, that they can join the struggle. If they're not going to join the struggle, they can welcome the change. So in a sense, I'm a bit in the middle. I'm not asking for poor me, that Israelis are angry with me because I'm not supporting them, and I'm seen as supporting the Palestinian cause, and I support Palestinian statehood. And Palestinians are angry with me because I don't sign on to BDS, I don't take public positions. So be it. If I have some kind of role, it's history, my shape, my experience has given me a certain place and space. When I see the young South African lawyers appearing in The Hague, Adila Hassan, she was our law clerk, new generation. Tibeka Ngukai Tobi, new generation. I'm so proud of them. And they're tapping into our history of overcoming seemingly totally impossible odds. We achieved it. And it's retaining that belief. It can happen. It can happen, it must happen, and that vision has to be held there all the time. And work to persuade Jewish Israelis. It might look quite hopeless now, pathetic in terms of the opinion polls and so on. You just can't give up on that. And I'm in a peculiar position, very peculiar. I was kissed one day on both cheeks by Yasser Arafat and sat next to Barak on the Supreme Court bench the next day. It's fate, history, South Africa, my story, my short arm has given me a kind of a role. And I loved the words that you were using. I loved you overcoming your fear of microphones to express yourself with more vigor afterwards. And I'd just like to say thank you to the Einstein Forum, because if Einstein represented anything to me, it was that large world vision that it's more than seeing out of the box, it's seeing out of the world, seeing out of the universe. And thank you so much for arranging this whole program.
Well, I've gotten used to and less anxious about saying that Einstein's ghost would have been happy about X or Y. But I actually find this, and Lord knows, in the last 5 years I have had many conversations on this subject. This is the most moving one that I have had. I think everybody was close to a different kind of tear at a certain point, as am I. And I'm immensely grateful. Kosik is not afraid of microphones. It was a big decision for him to violate Shabbat by taking part in, video talk with Avrum and microphone. I appreciate all of you terribly, and my only regret about this, Avrum, is that you're not here with us, but we'll try to make sure that that happens on another occasion, okay? So, now we're only going to be half an hour late, which is not disaster. Oh, this is nothing. Half an hour, if nobody's running to a plane, which was the worry yesterday. Half an hour is nothing, because we really do, I think, after this conversation, need a good 15-minute break before we turn to the next It'll be the last session, but it's the next thorny world historical question, which Sean Wilentz will give us. But let us thank our speakers.